Here are 6 things we should try and do for every drawing before we actually pick up a pen. Rushing to start is not a great drawing practice if we're wanting to learn and wanting to develop our skills. The first thing we need to do is to choose our reference, the photo we're going to use to draw from, with care. It's easy to think, look, anything will do, and because we're impatient to start, we grab anything. But the truth is, if I grab a photo that's beyond my ability level, I'm setting myself up to fail. And it's not just the discouragement in doing that that's going to be the problem. If I don't have the skills to navigate the challenges of this particular drawing subject or scene, then I'm going to do badly at it. But I may not have enough experience to appreciate the problems with how I've tried to interpret the scene onto the paper. And that means I may be reinforcing bad habits in drawing, ones that aren't actually taking my end result drawing to the place I'd like it to be, rather than developing my skills. The second thing I need to do once I've found a reference is actually to examine the photo that I've got. Do I want to draw it as is? Really? Again, it's easy to think, oh look, this'll do, but it's much easier to get the drawing I want if firstly I make the photo as much as possible close to how I want my drawing to look. And the most obvious thing is cropping. Taking a little bit off one side can shift where the center is, and that can make for a much more interesting, engaging, dynamic composition. I might adjust the contrast, the lights and darks to create a little more drama in the lighting of the photo, and that's going to give me a better starting point for a more dramatic appearance in my drawing. I might move things, I might leave things out, I might modify things in some way that's in the reference. And again, to have thought this through before I start is a great advantage when I start. This next point is when I look at my photo, the physical size of my photo or the physical side of an image on a tablet or some other device, is to work out how am I changing the scale, basically the size of my drawing, in reference to the actual image that I'm looking at. Am I making it larger? Am I making it smaller? Am I drawing at the same size? Lots of advantages when we start drawing in making it the same size, and even if we're aiming to do that, sometimes it creeps larger or becomes smaller. But if we don't have an aim, then we can't work at developing the skill of deliberately controlling the size. One thing to bear in mind is, how long am I going to draw for? What's the length of my drawing session? Because the amount of detail that I will be, if you like, tempted to draw from a larger image will be more than in a smaller image. Because a smaller photo, in some ways, simplifies how the detail looks, and therefore that can be some of the work I would otherwise need to do when I draw myself done for me. Thinking about the scale of our drawing in regards to the reference leads on to the next point, which is, what pen am I going to use? Once I've worked out what I'm wanting to use in terms of my photo and how large my drawing's going to be, and say my depth effects, now I can start to make a realistic choice, or a helpful choice at least, with what size pen I'm going to use. A 0.5mm fine liner is going to give a much heavier, darker line than a 0.5 fine liner. They will create a very different overall feel for how my drawing looks at the end, simply because one is going to leave more ink on the paper for every mark I do. However, I can create a very different effect using a finer pen and putting many more marks on. If I'm hatching, I can create a much greater range of greys, of mid-greys, of mid-values, using a finer pen where I can layer many, many more lines next to each other and on top of each other, and yet still leave even tiny amounts of white paper, which will pull back the blackness of the tone I'm creating. And being aware of the depths of plane moving back and what objects I plan to draw in each depth of plane gives me more information to use when I'm working out what pens do I plan to use. Of course, once we start, we may work out, actually, no, I should have gone with a heavier pen or a finer pen for this, but we have a starting point, and that's important. This next one is the one that for me is the most recent one that I've taken to doing. But that's too before I start to draw. Having done all the thinking that I've done already about pens and depth and values and composition, I try and picture in my mind the finished drawing. It's as if I've drawn it and I'm looking at it. What does it look like? Often when we draw, we're so focused on looking at our reference bit by bit and drawing it bit by bit on our paper that what we don't have is an overall coherence in what we're trying to do. In a sense, our finished drawing becomes all the little bits put together, almost like a jigsaw puzzle of little drawings. And that may sometimes work, and for some drawing styles and approaches, it may work better than others. But I suspect generally most of the time for most of us, it actually ends up scattering our attention over the whole drawing. We don't get that coherence, that focus, that sense of everything in my drawing is working to pull the person looking at its attention to a certain place to consistently generate a feeling, a mood, a response, an enjoyment, whatever. I actually find, though, imagining how it's going to look at the end, as clearly as I can, very much helps me then to draw it that way. It actually suggests the actual techniques that I will need to use and the actual strategy I will need to have throughout the drawing to get to that result. It's almost like I'm copying the drawing that I've already drawn before I've drawn it. But this visualizing of a finished drawing also leads on to what I think probably has the most immediate improvement in any drawing I do, and it's my last point. While I think all of these points have been important, the one that I think has the most immediate effect on improving my drawings is this one. And that's having done all this thinking, having looked hard at the photo, worked out the scale, worked out the pens, worked out the depths of plane, visualize what the finished drawing is going to look like. Now I spend 2 or 3 or 4 minutes using the pens I thought I might use and playing around, making some marks on a scrap piece of paper to see if they create the effect that I want them to have for that particular piece of the overall drawing. So if I'm experimenting with marks with something that's going to be in the distance, then I draw it in the way I think it's going to be in the distance in my mark making experimentation, not the way I might do it if it were going to be a lot closer to the front. If I'm concerned about representing the effect of detail with perhaps ornate architectural decoration where I'm having to draw the effect because it's just too complex and too small, then I'll experiment with that with the pen I think I'm going to use. And I'll see, does it somehow look real or does it just look awkward? If in the end I can't solve the problem of how to represent something in my reference on this scrap of paper beforehand, then that might be a good reason to think, well, perhaps the reference I'm using is not one that I'm up to drawing yet, not up to drawing well, because there's no point taking on the challenge of an overall drawing if there are some key elements in it that I don't yet have a process, a strategy, and a drawing technique to be able to do credibly. I'm better off concentrating those things that I struggle with on a smaller scale until I get them more correct, more accurate, more how I want them to be. It may be capturing the effective detail of a particular subject, such as architectural detailing, or it might be foliage of any type, anywhere. It might be faces. It might be cars in the street. If we have subjects or effects that we struggle to get right, then we're better off focusing on those in a series of short exercises where we do those things over and over again, rather than attempting a scene where we can't manage them. But my experimenting, even if they are a subject that I'm confident in doing, it lets me work out the marks I'm going to need for this drawing, because it's not as if I draw foliage the same way every drawing. The trees are different, the leaves are different, the lighting's different, the distance from the observer is different, and so forth. And the importance in the overall scene is different. And all of these things affect the marks I choose to draw this particular tree in this drawing so that it sits in the drawing the way I have visualized it in my visualizing the finished drawing process done earlier. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If you haven't done these things, please, why not give them a go? Write them out. I think there's actually 7 in the end. Write them out and go through them one by one for your next drawing and see if they don't help you produce a drawing that you're perhaps more pleased with than you have been. Or at least see if they don't help you feel that you're more in control of the drawing process, of your drawing process, that it's not such a lucky dip as to how the finished drawing turns out. Because developing a process, a strategy that works for us, for me, is an important part of my drawing journey. We hear different ideas. If we try them, we can let go of the ones that don't seem to matter, but we can incorporate the ones that work or that improve my drawing at least into my understanding, into my process. So why not give it a go? But in the end, whatever you draw, however you do it, and whatever you do before the ink hits the paper, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.